Hi everyone, it's Heather with Tropica Exotica, and today I'm going to be talking about dimensions. But before we get into dimensions, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody for my new subscribers, and to just let you know that if you're interested in what I'm talking about today, just feel free to go ahead and click the subscribe button and make sure to click on the bell for notifications for when I post a new video. Okay, so before we get started, I also just want to send a quick thank you out to my friends. A couple videos ago I had talked about my close call. I shared that with some of my friends and they really helped me out, so I just want to send a thank you to them. It's really great when you have people that are your friends, your soul tribe, your soul family that you can count on to help you out when you're going through some of these hard times that we encounter during our spiritual awakening process. So when it comes to dimensions, when we came into this world, we probably were not thinking about what dimension it is. We're just aware that we have a body, we're going through our normal day-to-day lives, we have family, we have school, we have a career, we have our home, so we're kind of focused on this environment in which we find ourselves in. So one of the things that I think most of us experience is that when we're kind of growing up, we kind of think of ourselves as a physical body, and most of us kind of think, okay, well, I've got a soul, and what happens after I die? That soul goes on to heaven, or, you know, goes off into space somewhere. So I think we conceptually kind of have that idea, but it isn't until we start to awaken spiritually when we kind of really start to expand our knowledge and our understanding of what dimension is, what the various dimensions are, and the different beings that exist in them. And a lot of people, you know, I think if we were aware of the different dimensions and the different beings in those dimensions, I think most of us would have a hard time operating in this 3D world. And so there are some people that come in with that blueprint or soul plan that they are going to be experiencing dimensions, other beings in other dimensions while they're here. But I think for the most part, you know, most of us kind of tend to just focus on what we see in front of us. So when it comes to experiencing other dimensions, one of the things that, you know, I kind of think about when it comes to my own spiritual awakening is it always kind of reminds me of this funny Saturday Night Live skit where it was a story about abductions, and it was two people's very different experiences. So one person had an alien abduction and they felt like they were bathed in light, they felt like they were wrapped up in love, they had all these positive experiences. And the other person that had the alien abduction ended up peeing over a bowl, and the aliens were knocking her boobs back and forth. So it was just funny video because it was two extremely different experiences. That's kind of how I feel like my spiritual awakening process happened when it comes to opening up to other dimensions. Because a lot of people, when they have a spiritual awakening, if it's a full-on spiritual awakening and they, you know, might have a Kundalini activation, they end up going through this bliss-like phase. They start to see angels, and that was totally not my experience. Mine was completely the opposite. Mine was like the stuff of nightmares. So this is why I feel like it's important to talk about dimensions, because when all of a sudden you're opened up to a whole bunch of different experiences of beings in other dimensions, it may be quite unsettling. So when it comes to seeing into dimensions, we have a tendency in our day-to-day life to focus on what we see as tangible, and that makes sense, right? We're walking around, we need to make sure we don't step over stuff. But what we have to understand is that there are beings in dimensions all around us all the time. So just because we can't see them doesn't mean that they're not there. But we have just been trained to focus on these physical things. And then also when it comes to seeing into dimensions, I don't know what dimension some of the things I see are in. It's not like these things go around with a tag saying I'm in 4D, I'm in 5D, I'm in 6D. So a lot of it is just, you know, us trying to understand, like, okay, well, there's something, it's not in my 3D environment, but it's definitely, you know, something out there. So when it comes to seeing in other dimensions, one of the things that you can practice is, you know, a technique you can use is if you're going to bed at night, if there's a little bit light coming in your bedroom window, what you can do is just lay there and kind of zone out, kind of unfocus your eyes. And if you do that, you'll kind of start to see things kind of start going through space. And so that's what I'm talking about we're so focused on focusing our eyes and looking at something solid that when we unfocus our eyes, we can kind of start to see that there's other things going on around us. And so, but when you're doing that, when you start to see something, if all of a sudden you try to focus on it, it'll go away. So it takes some practice, and a lot of times it's just like forms or shapes that I end up seeing. But that is one way where you can try to learn to not focus so much, and that will allow you to see what might be going on around you. And so when it comes to some of those things that you might see, again, I don't always know what exactly it is. I've heard Kelly Coffey sometimes refer to it as space junk, and I thought that was kind of funny. One time I did see, I think I opened up my eyes in the middle of the night and it looked kind of like kelp hanging down, and it kind of had this kind of flowing movement. And so it was just kind of fascinating to watch. But those are the kind of things where, again, you know, we're taught to focus our eyes on things. We're taught that this is our surroundings, our world. But when you begin to open up spiritually, you're going to possibly start experiencing things in other dimensions. So it's really important to kind of have a basic understanding of that concept. So now I'm going to use the whiteboard and talk through some of the points. Okay, hopefully y'all can see this okay. So up here I have the concept of source, God. I always kind of look at it as a sun. And so if we understand that we are all projections of source or God, we project into our form. So in the 3D world, that would be a human body. And the 3D is a very dense environment. It's the lowest one that you can go into. So we volunteered to come down here. But one of the concepts that you need to understand and be aware of is we have a tendency to just think of ourselves as, you know, our 3D body, but in actuality, we are a fractal. And so if you kind of look at yourself, you've got your Earth fractal, and then you've probably heard of the concept of your higher self. And so your higher self would be existing in another dimension. And then there would be other fractals of yourselves that would be having an existence possibly in other, you know, galaxy like Andromeda, or maybe you have a Lemurian fractal. So this is just one of the concepts that, you know, you need to be aware of, but mostly you need to be understand that you have a higher self, and as you evolve spiritually, this higher self also evolves up through the dimensions. And when it comes to dimensions, it's an increase in vibration. And so this is very dense. And as you evolve spiritually, this is how the higher dimensional beings would look like. So for us humans, we're here down in the 3D world. So as we go up in dimensions, we come into 4D. So this is the fourth dimension. And so one of the things that you need to understand about this is that in this dimension, these are not connected to source. So these are projections of energy, and I just kind of drew some stuff that I've seen Whenever you see black shadows, they can have different types of forms and they can be more complex. This was supposed to look like a dog, but it kind of looks more like a giraffe. But I've experienced different beings in this fourth dimension. And the other thing that you want to understand about this is that these entities, is usually what people call them, since they're not connected to source or God energy, they need something to sustain them, and so they can feed off of humans. And so one of the things that I have heard about is a lot of times people that are clairvoyant, if they go into a bar or something, sometimes they can see entities feeding off of people. I don't want to freak everybody out, but I just thought that was kind of interesting, because this does happen where the beings can, you know, use people in order to sustain themselves. And the other thing, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but when it comes to the fourth dimension, I believe that this is where, when we have thoughts, words, actions, when we are having these thoughts, I think they're forming in this dimension before they come into our world. One thing that I have noticed lately is when I start thinking something about something, it's manifesting very quickly. And so I think we're kind of in this training phase, because when it comes to 5D, this is instant manifestation. And so we want to start being very conscientious of what we create in our world, because the time lag between when we think it and when it actually manifests is beginning to get a lot smaller. Okay, so in the fifth dimension, this is what everybody's talking about. This is where we are evolving to. So one of the videos I would recommend you watch is the one that I did on Spiritual Awakening, Our Place in the Universe. That kind of explains a little bit about what we're doing. But in this fifth dimension, what we'll be doing is, this is more the bliss, love type experience. This is unity consciousness. This is where we do not see ourselves as separate. And I have been noticing over time through my spiritual awakening, I have been experiencing more of the bliss type states. And you have to understand that that's a constant evolving process. So, you know, we'll have those bliss states and then we'll go back down. We'll have the bliss states, we'll go back down. So it's a continual process. And so one of the things that I've experienced is I have seen what looks like lines and these intermittent blue circles. And I've only seen that once. And if you watch my video on Atlantis Bimini, I talk about how I had that experience. So what ended up happening was, as I went into the area known as Bimini, which is also considered Atlantis, I felt like I was starting to have an activation. And so when I was in the hotel room, everything in the entire room was outlined in these blue lines. And of course at the time I did not know what that meant, but later I ended up watching a video with Kelly Coffey, and she was watching a video and she was showing these exact same type of blue lines, and she said that she sees them in the fifth dimension. And then I've also read articles by Lisa Transcendence Brown where she also has pictures that are similar. So, and again, I can only tell you what I've experienced and what I know. I mean, if anybody has any more information on what exactly that is, that would be really great. Okay, and so when it comes to the sixth dimension and higher, this is where we get into geometry and lights. And so as we increase in vibration, our form becomes less, and this is where, you know, one of the things that you have to understand when it comes to the higher dimensions is a lot of times you'll hear about different angelic beings taking human form. And the reason why they do that is because they're trying to not freak you out, and so also that you might recognize them. But their true form is probably like a light. And so there's a really fascinating video where Kelly Coffey, she's actually kind of talking about Archangel Michael, and he shows up in her living room, and as a clairvoyant, she's able to see him and talk to him, and at one point he ends up turning into a blue light, and so she starts to understand, oh, okay, this blue light type orb that I'm seeing, that's actually Archangel Michael, that's his form, but he shows up so that people can recognize who he is and how we would recognize them. And so that's one thing that might be confusing to people is, you know, as you go up in vibration, although you hear about these forms, they're just doing that in order for you to have more comfort with them. So other things that we want to talk about when it comes to different dimensions are the concept of ghost. I don't know if you can see this down here, but there's a really good video out by Psychic Bob called Psychic Bob Explains Ghost, and he really does a great job going just kind of over the basics about ghosts. But ghosts are actually earthbound spirits, so they're not in the light, and so they're kind of in between worlds, and Psychic Bob refers to that as purgatory. So my experience with earthbound spirits is that I had one that it was an okay experience. The other one was scary, and now that I've gone through several different, you know, events during my spiritual awakening, I'm not afraid anymore. But when it comes to ghosts, you might be able to see them, you might feel them, they might touch you, they can throw objects. It just depends on how much energy and power that they have attained. But what you have to understand is that ghosts are suffering because they have not gone into the light yet. And so that's one thing that you always want to be aware of. And like I said, I really recommend that video by Psychic Bob on that. Another thing that you might experience are sparkly lights. And again, I don't know what dimension these are in, but I have seen them. They are really cool. I've only had that happen a couple of times, but they were just kind of flitting around my room, and my dog was actually also saw them, and he was like watching them track across. And so it was kind of funny to watch that, but that's a really, really cool thing to see, and I believe that these are spirits. And orbs are another concept that you might hear about, and what I think orbs are basically you just, the spirits just take this shape in order to travel through dimensions, and I believe that's what orbs are. Okay, so that's a little summary of dimensions as far as I understand it. Again, dimensions is one of those fascinating topics that I would love to be able to spend more time in. When it comes to the spiritual awakening process, there's a whole bunch of different rabbit holes to go into, and I just haven't had the time yet to delve into it. I know as you start to grow and evolve spiritually, you'll start to have different experiences. So this is one of the kind of basics things that I wanted people to understand, because you know, for some of us it kind of opens us up to a different world, and it can be kind of scary. So I just want to let you know that if you do encounter beings in different realms, that you are powerful, and you just need to remember that. There's nothing to be afraid of, and so, but I know that takes time, so you just have to be patient with yourselves. So anyway, that's it for today. I just want to thank again everybody for watching, liking, and subscribing. Thanks. Bye-bye.